It was an ordinary morning, but for DeMarcus, it felt anything but. As he stepped off the bus and onto the cracked sidewalk of the upscale neighborhood, a knot twisted in his stomach. It was the kind of area where the grass seemed greener, the houses bigger, and the smiles, at least from a distance, more welcoming. But DeMarcus knew better than to believe in facades. He'd seen the looks, the whispers, the way people clutched their bags just a little tighter when he walked past. His father had warned him about places like this, but DeMarcus had always pushed the warnings aside. He was here to prove himself, to show that he didn't just belong, but that he could be more than the world had decided he should be. And today he was supposed to meet with Mr. Greaves, the wealthy owner of the prestigious law firm where DeMarcus had applied for an internship. The email had seemed too good to be true. An internship at Greaves & Sons, one of the most influential firms in the city. He'd worked tirelessly, polished his resume, aced the interview, and even went through a grueling round of testing to get this far. His grades were perfect, his work ethic unmatched. But what they couldn't see in the polished resume was the reality he carried with him, the weight of being black in a world that often saw you as less, even when you were standing right in front of them, offering everything you had. DeMarcus straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and pushed open the heavy glass doors of the firm. The air inside smelled of expensive cologne and something faintly oppressive. The receptionist looked up, her smile professional but cold. "Can I help you?" she asked, her eyes scanning his face for just a moment too long, as though trying to place him. "I'm here for a meeting with Mr. Greaves," DeMarcus said, trying to keep his voice steady, his heart pounding against his chest. She nodded, tapping away at her keyboard, her fingers moving quicker than DeMarcus could blink. "He's expecting you. Go ahead and take a seat in the waiting area. I'll let him know you're here." DeMarcus thanked her and walked towards the sleek, minimalist seating area, but his mind was racing. The waiting room was lined with abstract art, the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum, and the soft hum of conversation from the other side of the room was almost suffocating. He sat down, trying to calm his nerves, but every time someone glanced his way, his stomach churned. He hated this feeling, the constant awareness that he was different, that he didn't quite fit. Even when he had done everything right, even when he knew he was good enough, he was always going to be judged by something beyond his control. Something as simple as obvious as the color of his skin. The door to Mr. Greaves' office opened, and a tall, well-dressed man emerged. He was in his late 50s, his suit perfectly tailored, his face sharp and chiseled. His eyes met DeMarcus's for a second, then flickered away, and he smiled thinly. "DeMarcus?" "Come in," Mr. Greaves said, his voice smooth but lacking warmth. DeMarcus stood up quickly, a little too quickly, and followed him inside. The office was grand, dark wood furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city's skyline, and bookshelves stacked with leather-bound volumes. Everything about the room screamed power, authority, and a certain unspoken expectation that you knew your place. "Have a seat." Mr. Greaves gestured to a chair across from his large, polished desk. DeMarcus sat down, the leather creaking under his weight. For the first few minutes, the conversation was cordial, surface level. Mr. Greaves asked about DeMarcus's background, his education, his aspirations. But the more they talked, the more DeMarcus could feel something off in the air. There was an underlying tension that he couldn't quite name, a feeling that no matter what he said, no matter how good his answers were, it wouldn't be enough. As they moved on to discussing the specifics of the internship, Mr. Greaves's tone shifted slightly. "I'll be honest with you, DeMarcus. We get a lot of applications, a lot of qualified candidates. It's a very competitive position. But I'll say this, your resume is impressive. It stands out." DeMarcus's heart skipped a beat. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice steady despite the excitement bubbling inside. "But," Mr. Greaves continued, leaning back in his chair, his fingers steepled together, "there's something about you that doesn't quite fit. Not with our firm. Not with the clients we deal with. We value professionalism here, tradition, culture. You seem a bit too fresh, if you understand what I mean." DeMarcus froze, a chill running down his spine. He had heard it before. The whispers, the subtle jabs, the unspoken barriers that had been placed in front of him his whole life. He had ignored them, fought through them, and come out stronger. But now, sitting across from a man who could change everything for him, the words hit harder than he expected. "Sir," DeMarcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He knew where this was going, but he couldn't let it show. "Look, I'm not saying you don't have potential. But sometimes it's not about what you know. It's about fitting in. And you just don't seem to be the kind of person our clients want to see representing this firm. The words landed like a punch to the gut. DeMarcus's mind raced. He had done everything right, yet here he was, facing a wall he couldn't see. The coldness in Mr. Greaves's eyes made it clear. No matter how hard he tried, he wasn't going to win. Are you saying I'm not qualified? DeMarcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the sting of rejection already settling in. Mr. Greaves sighed, almost condescendingly. It's not about qualifications. It's about culture, DeMarcus. It's about the way people see you. And right now, the way I see you is a distraction. DeMarcus sat there numb. He had worked his whole life to get here. He had proven himself time and time again. And yet, in one moment, it all seemed meaningless. The world had already made its judgment, and there was nothing he could do to change it. He stood up slowly, trying to gather his composure. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Greaves," he said, his voice firm despite the storm brewing inside him. He turned toward the door, but before he reached the handle, he heard Mr. Greaves speak again. "DeMarcus, this isn't personal. It's just business." The words hit harder than any insult. As DeMarcus stepped back out into the waiting room, he couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper had just happened. This wasn't just about one rejection. It was a reminder of the battle he would face every single day. DeMarcus stepped out of the building, the heavy glass doors closing behind him with a finality that sent a cold shiver down his spine. The sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement, but it felt like the world had dimmed somehow. His mind was racing, but no matter how hard he tried to process what had just happened, it all felt like a blur. A cruel, suffocating blur. The weight of the conversation with Mr. Greaves hung over him like a dark cloud. It wasn't just that he hadn't gotten the internship, it was the way it had been taken from him. The way his worth had been reduced to something intangible, something invisible. He had been qualified, overqualified even. But none of that mattered. Not when your skin color was the first thing people saw. And in the end, that's what decided everything. DeMarcus clenched his fists at his sides, trying to fight back the rage that bubbled up inside him. He wanted to scream, to shout at the world for its unfairness. But he knew it wouldn't change anything. He had to keep it together. He had to be strong. But how much strength could one person have before it all came crashing down? The sound of footsteps behind him made him turn. He didn't have to look to know who it was. His best friend, Eli, was walking up to him, a concerned expression on his face. "DeMarcus, man, what happened?" Eli asked, his voice filled with worry. DeMarcus forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's nothing. Just didn't get it." Eli stopped in his tracks, eyeing him with disbelief. "Didn't get it? That's it. You've been working for this for months, man. They can't just." "They can," DeMarcus interrupted, his voice sharper than he intended. "They can, Eli. They just did. And it's not the first time, It's the same old story." Eli's face softened, and he stepped closer. "What do you mean? You've been through worse, man. I know it stings, but you're stronger than this." DeMarcus shook his head, frustration and hurt making it hard to speak. "I am strong, but it doesn't change anything. No matter how good I am, no matter how hard I work, it'll never be enough for people like him." "Like them?" Eli looked at him for a long moment before letting out a slow breath. I'm here for you, right? Always." "I know," DeMarcus muttered. "It's just, sometimes it feels like it's not enough. Like I'm not enough." The two of them stood there for a few moments, the weight of the situation settling between them like a heavy fog. Eli didn't try to say anything else. He didn't try to fix it or make it better. He just stood by DeMarcus, offering silent support in a way that only real friends could. After a while, DeMarcus finally spoke, his voice quieter now. "I've been trying to fit in, Eli. I've been trying to play the game they want me to play. But it's never enough. I don't know what to do anymore." Eli looked him in the eye. "You don't have to fit in, man. You just have to be you. I know it's tough, but I'm telling you, you're going to get there. Just don't lose yourself in the process. Don't let them win by changing who you are." DeMarcus nodded slowly. It was good advice, but it didn't feel like it was enough to heal the wound inside him. "I'll try, but I don't know how much more I can take." Eli clapped him on the back, his grip firm. "One step at a time." You're stronger than you think. The two of them parted ways, DeMarcus walking in the opposite direction, the bitter taste of rejection still lingering in his mouth. He didn't know where to go from here. The world felt so small, so confining. The opportunities that had once seemed endless were now tainted by a harsh reality that he couldn't escape. As he walked, he replayed the conversation with Mr. Greaves over and over in his head. The words stung, but it was the look in his eyes that really haunted him, the look that said, without saying it, that DeMarcus would always be an outsider in places like this. It wasn't just about a job. It was about a system that had already decided who mattered and who didn't. Later that night, DeMarcus sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone. The message from Eli earlier was still fresh in his mind, but it did little to ease the storm of thoughts raging inside him. He scrolled through his social media feed, trying to distract himself, but everything he saw only made him feel worse. Post after post, pictures of people living lives that seemed so far removed from his own. Photos of his classmates landing internships, going on vacations, or celebrating new jobs. And then there were the comments, the likes, the endless stream of validation that seemed to be reserved for everyone but him. He had worked harder than most, but it still felt like the world was pushing him aside. As he scrolled, one post caught his eye. It was a picture of a white man, someone DeMarcus had seen around town before, someone whose family had wealth and influence. The man was smiling in a suit, standing in front of a luxury car, his caption boasting about the new job he had just landed at Greaves & Sons. It hit DeMarcus like a ton of bricks. Here was someone who had been handed everything, someone who had never had to fight for a seat at the table, someone whose skin color had never once been a barrier. And now he was in the position that DeMarcus had fought for, the very position he had been rejected from. All because, in the eyes of people like Mr. Greaves, someone like him, someone black, would never truly belong. DeMarcus tossed his phone onto the table, his hands shaking with a mixture of rage and helplessness. He didn't know what to do anymore. Every path he had tried to take felt blocked. Every dream he had chased seemed just out of reach, like an illusion taunting him. And then, in the silence of his room, he made a decision. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. He wasn't going to let it be over. He wasn't going to let them win. The next morning came too quickly. DeMarcus hadn't slept much the night before, his mind spinning with the events of the previous day. The words from Mr. Greaves echoed in his head, even as he walked the familiar route to his part-time job at a local bookstore. It wasn't the path he'd envisioned for himself, stacking books, handling customer complaints, and shelving inventory, but it was a job, and it paid the bills. At least it gave him something to focus on other than the gnawing feeling that he wasn't enough. But as he stepped through the bookstore doors, the usual scent of paper and coffee filled his senses, and he felt a slight calm wash over him. The low hum of conversation and the occasional chime of the doorbell as customers came in created a rhythm he could lose himself in. It was a familiar, comforting space. But the nagging frustration that had taken root inside him never quite went away. He had grown used to the looks. The judgmental glances from customers when they saw him behind the counter. The subtle shifts when a customer asked for help only to frown at his answer, as if his words weren't quite up to the standard they expected. It was exhausting, but it wasn't new. It was the kind of discrimination he had lived with his whole life. And the more he thought about it, the more the realization hit him. It wasn't just about his resume, his grades, or his work ethic. It was about something deeper, something that no one ever talked about openly, the way society saw him before he ever opened his mouth. It was about being black and how that fact overshadowed everything else. The day passed slowly. As usual, DeMarcus dealt with customers who barely acknowledged his presence, and then there were those who treated him like he didn't belong in the same space they occupied. But he kept his head down, did his job, and tried not to think about the future. It wasn't until lunchtime that things began to change. As DeMarcus was setting up a display near the front of the store, the door chimed again, and a woman walked in. She was in her mid-30s, dressed in a professional but casual outfit, loose blouse, well-tailored jeans, and a pair of flats that clicked on the tile floor. She had a confident stride, the kind that made DeMarcus think she belonged to the world he was trying to break into. She walked past him without a word, but then stopped suddenly, her eyes catching the title of a book on the shelf he had just organized. "You have The New Frontier?" she asked, her voice sharp and clear. DeMarcus nodded. "Yes, it's right over there." He pointed toward the far end of the aisle. She nodded in thanks and began walking towards it, but DeMarcus couldn't help but notice that she had a particular look about her. The kind of look that made him feel like he wasn't being seen, not really. She was confident, sure, but there was something about her that seemed detached, like she was moving through the motions without really engaging. Something about her made DeMarcus feel like she was part of that world, one he was still struggling to break into. A few minutes later, she returned with the book in hand, and DeMarcus took it from her to scan. She smiled at him, a brief, polite smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. DeMarcus handed her the receipt and said, "Thank you for stopping by." She looked up at him then, as if seeing him for the first time. "You seem out of place here," she said. It wasn't an insult, not exactly, but it felt like one. There was a certain edge to her words, like she was observing him from a distance. "I wouldn't expect someone like you to be working here." DeMarcus paused, unsure of how to respond. His stomach tightened, and a familiar feeling of being judged crept up on him. "Why is that?" he asked, his voice careful. She shrugged, a nonchalant gesture that only made him feel smaller. "Just doesn't seem like your type of environment." But hey, no judgment. People have to make a living. "Yeah," DeMarcus said, forcing a smile. "People have to make a living." The woman turned to leave, but then paused and looked back at him. "I didn't mean to offend you. I don't know. I thought you'd be doing something bigger. You're probably better than this." The words hit him hard, harder than he expected. Better than this. The implication was clear. Whatever it was DeMarcus was doing right now, working in a bookstore, scraping by, wasn't where he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be somewhere else. Somewhere better. But why wasn't he? The woman left without another word, but her comment lingered like a punch to the gut. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be at Greaves & Sons, or in a courtroom, or leading a team at some top-tier company. He was supposed to be living a life that matched his potential, one where he didn't have to settle, didn't have to fight every single day to be seen. And yet here he was, standing in the same bookstore, day after day, surrounded by people who made it clear he didn't belong. He couldn't keep doing this. He couldn't keep accepting the scraps life handed him. He knew there was more for him out there, but how was he ever supposed to get there if the world refused to let him?